Explosion at the Poem Factory by Kyle Lukoff, illustrated by Mark Hoffman. When automatic pianos came to Ludston, Kilmer Watts had to find a new job. He had spent years teaching people the intricacies of fingering, the ins and outs of sonatas, and the importance of heart and soul. But with these newfangled machines, you could push a button, and the piano would do the playing for you. 5 times the sound without a second wasted on practice. Kilmer didn't know what else he was good at, but had always wondered what went on inside the poem factory. Weren't poems made by hand? That's horse and buggy talk, boomed the foreman. Back in my day, we had to wait weeks, months even, for creaky old bards to deliver the goods. Our modern world needs assembly line poetics, don't you think? New poems for a new day. Why spend hours wrestling with rhymes when our prosodizer can find the perfect synonym with the flip of a switch? Kilmer looked around at the buzzing, clanking machines. Maybe the foreman was right, and he needed a job. Soon, Kilmer learned how to operate the meter and empty the cliché bins. The Voltron stopped making him nervous, and the AMPA breaker wasn't as complicated as it looked. It was easy to assemble a poem. Pick a rhyme scheme, sprinkle in some similes, don't overdo the refrains, always add alliteration. The multi-purpose poem industry was booming, and the factory shipped everything from odes to epithalamiums to markets across the land. Kilmer made mistakes, of course. A poem rhyming box with talk resulted in hundreds of angry letters. A hiccup in the scansion scanner resulted in a batch of haiku with 2, 4, even 5 times the acceptable number of syllables. Several sheets of blank verse came out entirely blank. After that, he made sure to keep a close eye on the details, and life was sweet. But one morning, when Kilmer had been working at the poem factory for a year and a day, disaster struck. First, the metaphor unmixer malfunctioned. There was a clog in the drainage pipe, and mixed metaphors threatened to overflow the vat. The assembly line began to self-destruct, and the machine failures cascaded catastrophically. Rhymes wrenched, the springs sprang out of the sprung rhythm, the AMPA breaker broke, the enjambment jammed, the anacrusis encrusted, and the kenning ceased to ken. Kilmer was at his trusty old meter and noticed the assembly line moving slow as molasses. The machines began to make the most terrible onomatopoeias, and the ceiling started to shake. Kilmer scanned the factory in a panic. He knew something was terribly wrong, but he didn't know how to fix it. He tried to warn his fellow poemsmiths. "Get out! Get out!" Kilmer shouted. "Before the building falls! The stress! The stress! It's tearing down the walls!" The screeching, banging, crashing, clanging of the cacophonous factory was overwhelming. No one could hear his heroic couplet, but clearly something was afoot. The workers piled onto delivery trosses or galloped as fast as their feet could carry them. escaping just beats before the factory's structural concrete verses shattered and lay splintered acrostic the shop floor. When he had recovered from the trauma, Kilmer needed a job again, and the people of Ludston and beyond still needed their poems. He went back to giving lessons, this time teaching people the difference between a sonnet and a sestina, and when to use a caesura. There were fewer poems than before. Plenty of Kilmer's students overused hyperbole and empty cliches. Far too many forced through an uncomfortable rhyme scheme. But even the simplest stanza had within it a beating heart. Since nobody had to practice the piano and everyone wanted to share their poems, Kilmer took it upon himself to organize a reading. The Lays of Ludston, he called it. Towns that had previously relied upon imported verse came to listen and left with their own ideas. The poem industry may have suffered, but poetry would survive. Assembled lines. Explosion at the Poem Factory can be fun to read, even if you don't know the difference between an anapest and an enjambment. But if you're curious about what all of these uncommon words mean, I hope these definitions help. Feet. A foot is the building block of a poem. Every 2, 3, and 4-syllable word and phrase is a type of foot. You know how the words desert and dessert sound very similar, even though they mean different things? As I'm sure you know, a desert is a dry and sandy place, while a dessert is a sweet end to a dinner. The two words sound different because you put the emphasis or stress on a different syllable in each of these 2-syllable words. If we wanted to describe desert and dessert in feet, we would say that desert is a crochet, while dessert is an iamb. When feet are organized into a pattern, they can become a specific kind of poem. Here are some examples of some feet, but not every possible foot. Amphibrach, a 3-syllable foot where the stress is on the middle syllable, like the word embarrass. Anapest, a 3-syllable foot where the stress is on the last syllable, like the phrase time to go. Dactyl, a 3-syllable foot where the stress is on the first syllable, like the word bicycle. Iamb, a 2-syllable foot where the stress is on the second syllable, like the word below. Molasses, a 3-syllable foot where all 3 syllables are stressed. I'm not sure these actually exist. Or a crochet, a 2-syllable foot where the stress is on the first syllable, like the word donut. Some types of poems. Acrostic. When a certain letter in each line of a poem spells out a word. An acrostic for the name Kyle could be kicks yellow lemons everywhere. We see that the lines start with K, Y, L, and E. That's an acrostic poem. Or you can have concrete verse, a poem where the words on the page are arranged into a picture that represents the poem's subject or meaning. This poem is arranged like a rainbow. So I'm sure that the meaning of this poem has something to do with the rainbow. It says, here, everything is gray and flat. On the other side is somewhere else, bounded by a pot of gold on either end. I know that someday I will leave this place and find the joys that other lands can hold. Until then, I will make the light myself. An epithallium is a poem that celebrates a marriage. A haiku is a traditional form of Japanese poetry with strict rules about length and subject. Haiku are usually about nature and try to express a feeling by describing a moment or setting. They can also be written in English and typically have a specific number of syllables per line: 5 in the first line, 7 in the second, and 5 in the third. Here is my example of a haiku. Not the first snowfall. Ground freezes reluctantly. Branches bend and sigh. A heroic couplet. 2 rhyming lines, 5 iambs in each 10-syllable line, called an iambic pentameter. Kilmer shouts a heroic couplet when he realizes the factory is going to explode. Lay. A poem that tells a story, usually a story of adventure or romance. An ode. An ancient form of poetry that is usually dedicated to someone or something.